Welcome back to our channel. Today I'm going to explain a movie called A Christmas Carol. Get comfortable. The movie tells the story of a cruel man who hates Christmas. Several ghosts visit him over 3 nights, and after their visits, the man is transformed into a kinder, gentler man as he realizes his fate is in the balance. The movie begins with a grumpy old man named Ebenezer Scrooge. He signs as a witness on his former business partner, Bob Marley's death certificate, and leaves. While walking to his office, he is disgusted at the sight of people excited about Christmas. 7 Christmas Eves later, Scrooge is now much older. He is counting his coins when his nephew, Fred, walks in. Scrooge is very much against Christmas because he believes it's a time for unnecessary bills, but Fred argues that Christmas is a time for charity. He invites Scrooge for dinner. Scrooge refuses, and when he confronts Scrooge about why he hates Christmas so much, Scrooge dismisses him. He greets the clerk, Mr. Cratchit, and leaves. Soon, 2 men arrive and request donations for poor people to make merry during Christmas, but Scrooge says he can't give out his money. He says if the people can't work for money, they should rather die to reduce the surplus population, and he dismisses them. Scrooge tells Cratchit that it's not fair to get the whole Christmas day off and still get paid, but he gives him the day off anyway, and they close. He goes home, and when he tries to open his front door, he sees a face on the locks. He is frightened, but on the second look, the face is gone. Scrooge enters the house, lights up a candle, and enters his room. He is changed into pajamas and has some hot chocolate beside the fireplace. However, Scrooge hears some strange sounds and locks all the doors in his room. He sits back by the fire and all the bells in his room jingle. When he blocks his ears, they become silent. Soon the door handle begins to twitch, and Marley's spirit, which has chains tied all over it, appears to Scrooge. Marley's spirit tells him that he wasted his time in life doing business when he could have been doing merciful and charitable works. He tells Scrooge to change his ways so his spirit won't suffer the same fate of roaming around when he dies. Marley's spirit also warns Scrooge that Scrooge will be haunted by 3 spirits. When the spirit leaves, Scrooge sees other spirits roaming outside and crying that they should have been more kind. He rushes back in and covers himself with his blanket. Soon, the clock strikes 1, a spirit visits Scrooge and introduces himself as a ghost of Scrooge's Christmas past. He and Scrooge visit Scrooge's past as shadows. They head to Scrooge's childhood community and see Scrooge's childhood friends playing around. Young Scrooge is not there, rather in school, alone, abandoned by his friends. Some Christmases later, Scrooge is a little bit older and he's in his classroom when his sister, Fan, comes to get him for dinner with the family. Fan gave birth to a son before her death. The 2 then moved to Fizzlewigs where Scrooge was an apprentice. They see him, his co-worker, Dick, and his boss Fizzlewig, after a day of work host a party. While young Scrooge is dancing, he sees a lady and dances with her the entire night. However, Scrooge has become a little older and richer. The lady confronts him for loving his coins more than he with her. He tries to explain otherwise, but she is convinced that he will only be in a relationship that he gains from, so she leaves him. Scrooge's spirit begins to feel the heartbreak from that day and tells the ghost to return him to his house. The ghost refuses, but he forcefully wears the ghost's cap on him and he flies back to his room in the present. Scrooge lands on the ground and sees a very bright light emanating from behind a door in his room. Soon, the door opens and Scrooge hears a voice that instructs him to enter. The room is well lit and decorated with Christmas ornaments. He sees a man laughing hysterically at the top of a tall Christmas tree. The man introduces himself as the ghost of the present. He tells Scrooge to hold onto his robe while they journey through Scrooge's present. The ghost creates a screen-like scenery on the ground where they watched Scrooge's present from a heavenly perspective. First, they watch Scrooge's lonely house before watching the liveliness on the streets. Then they go to a bakery, where poor people beg for food. Afterward, the ghost shows him Cratchit's house and tells him to watch how his clerk celebrates Christmas even while earning just 15 shillings a week. Mr. Cratchit's family is excited about Christmas. They wait on their dad, Mr. Cratchit, Tiny Tim, and Peter. When they are all complete, they sit at the table and are excited about the goose they are to eat. Mrs. Cratchit prays that one day the children get to eat turkey instead of goose every year, and her husband assures her that it will happen. He proceeds to make a toast to Scrooge because the dinner wouldn't have been possible without him, and he hopes that Scrooge feasts with them. However, his wife counters such thoughts because of Scrooge's reputation as a miser. She hopes that he were there so she could tell him a piece of her heart and toasts to a Merry Christmas instead. While Scrooge watches from above, he is empathic toward the family. The ghost then informs Scrooge that Tiny Tim would be dead before the next Christmas. Scrooge begs him to spare Tim's life, but the ghost reminds him of his statement earlier that incapable people should die to reduce the surplus population. Shortly after, the ghost takes Scrooge to his nephew's place, Fred, where they make fun of Scrooge's apathy to Christmas and regard him as an animal who hates Christmas. Fred makes a toast to Scrooge's health. The ghost then takes Scrooge into the engine of a clock and tells him that his time on Earth expires after the clock strikes 12. He reveals two haggard children from beneath his robe and tells Scrooge that one represents ignore while the other represents want. However, the clock strikes 12 and the ghost falls, and his flesh withers off while he laughs hysterically. Meanwhile, the two children taunt Scrooge with his words from earlier on before disappearing. Minutes later, he sees a shadow and inquires if the shadow is the ghost of the future and has come to show him what will happen. The ghost is silent, but Scrooge persists to tell the ghost to lead the way to see the future. Immediately, the ghost bursts at Scrooge and he finds himself rolling down a stairway. He halts and sees three men talk about his death on Christmas Day. One of the men doubts that Scrooge will have anyone mourn him, while the other believes that the funeral will be cheap because Scrooge was miserly. The third one says he may attend if there is a promise of lunch for him. They all laugh and leave. The ghost of the future then points Scrooge towards a shadow of a horse rider on his carriage. They begin to chase him while the rider tries to whip him. Scrooge runs into a street and is haunted by ghosts. Finally, he jumps into a tunnel and becomes little in size. He comes out from the other end of the tunnel and sees the rider approach again, and he begins to run till he falls into a drain tunnel. He slides through the tunnel and onto the rooftops of houses until he falls into a bag. The woman carrying the bag is Mrs. Dilbert. She goes in to meet Joe and shows him the contents of her bag. It's Scrooge's bed curtains and garment that she took from his house after he died. Scrooge calls her out to fire her, but she doesn't hear him. Soon, he sees Joe carry a rod to hit a rat in the room, and Scrooge runs to avoid getting hit. He jumps and finds himself in an empty room with a corpse lying covered on the bed. Scrooge asks the shadow how people react to his death, and the shadow reveals a couple who celebrate that they may not have to pay their debt to Scrooge since he's already dead. Scrooge asks the shadow if anyone will mourn him, and he points him to the Cratchit family who already mourns their Tiny Tim. Scrooge then asks the shadow about the corpse on the bed, and the shadow leads him to a graveyard and points him to a tomb. Before Scrooge checks the tomb, he asks the shadow if the future he sees is what will happen or what may happen. The ghost doesn't reply but forces him to check the tomb, and Scrooge's name is on it. The ghost shows him the date he died and he begins to beg, but the ground opens up and a coffin is inside the ground. Scrooge begs, but the spirit pushes him into the coffin. However, Scrooge wakes up in his room and is excited that he is alive. He looks out the window and sees a young boy walking on the street. He asks, and the young boy says it's Christmas. So he tells the boy to go to the poulterer and buy him the biggest turkey there and promises him £1/crown if he arrives in 5 minutes. Scrooge wants to anonymously send the turkey to Mr. Cratchit's family. He goes downstairs and finds Mrs. Dilbert cleaning, and he attempts to dance with her, but she runs out thinking he's deranged. Shortly after, Scrooge pays the boy and pays for the turkey and the cab for delivery. Then, he runs to the street wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. Afterward, Scrooge is dressed for dinner with his nephew. On his way, he sees one of the men who sought financial help the previous day. He apologizes and promises assistance. He enters the building and asks to join dinner, and they heartily welcome him. The next day, Mr. Cratchit arrives at work late and is scared that Scrooge will fire him. Instead, Scrooge announces an increase in his salary and promises to help his family in any way he can. Scrooge then tells Mr. Cratchit that they'll discuss business over Christmas punch, but wants him to buy some coal. Mr. Cratchit leaves happily about his boss's change of heart. That was all from the movie. Thank you for watching and being part of our family. Just to let you know, we are posting videos every day for you. Please subscribe to give us more motivation, and you will not miss our daily video.